Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Tangent TV. My name is Joe Lanzalata. Today, I am lucky enough to have with us Biraj Rath. Biraj, thanks so much for coming on. Just to give a bit of an intro to Biraj, he is one of the founding members of Braahmam International Limited, with offices in the US, Ireland, and India. Based in Dublin, he specializes in helping customers with design and delivery of products and services in the Middle East, Indian, and Southeast Asian markets. With over 20 years of dedication to the language industry, he is an authority on localization, digital learning technologies. Biraj has delivered papers at several translation industry forums, such as Industry Globalization and Localization Association, Localization World, and a number of others. He also has a number of other accomplishments, too many to list here today, but currently he serves as the CEO of Braahmam and is also one of the founding members of the Indian Language Association. I think that's an adequate introduction, Biraj. We're so happy to have you on. Thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me.
Of course. And so for today, we're going to be talking about key to your area of expertise. We're going to be talking about planning for internationalization. Now, as we work with a number of startups here in Tangent, a lot of them do have to, from day one, start planning for internationalization. But before we go into any details about how and all it works, can you give us a bit about the internationalization, the localization industry of making things local, and tell us a bit about why it might be important right now, specifically?
Perfect. Thank you so much, and welcome to everybody who's on this channel. Really fortunate to be here and be able to share what I love to do with young people who are beginning to get into the world and experiment their products and services. And as we get into the situation of introducing more and more digital products, and after the COVID situation, obviously we have just seen a lot of boom into the area going more digital, existing companies also. What is important to understand is any product or service will always have a digital interface to sell. So if whether you are in a physical product or whether you are in a digital product, it's extremely important to understand that the whole globe can become your market if you are available digitally to your customers or your potential customers, right? And the language part, or the localization as we call it, is really a means to communicate with your people. So your website is a communication medium, your app is a communication medium, your social media is really a communication medium that you want to reach out. But imagine if there were a very small set of people who only understand English, and more than, let's say, 70 or 80% people in the world. And I have a nice graph to show you later on when we go into a little bit in details, to understand that actually a lot of companies, including Microsoft and Google and all of the large companies, they've understood that if they need to reach out to the market more and more, they need to reach out to the customers who speak their language. Otherwise, if you can't communicate about your product and service in the language which the user or the consumer understands, then the consumer simply doesn't care about you. And there is enough data and research, and I'll share a few slides later on to get home that point. So for anybody who's into especially into the digital products, it's extremely important that they reach out to the customers, they are able to communicate their product or services. And the biggest thing is, it just de-risks everything. If you are only limited to a certain set of customers who, let's say, only speak English, you are simply ruling out your product or services from the rest of the 70-80% of the people who you can potentially reach by just making your communication or your website available in that language. And that's the biggest advantage of being in this digital world.
Okay, it's really interesting. And I think it's super important for any startup to think ahead about how they're going to grow. I think a lot of times when the students, specifically anybody's building their startup, it's like, okay, step one, let's like conquer this small area. And then maybe 15, 20 steps down the road, we're going to figure out how we're going to expand. Can you give us a bit of insight into why it would make sense to plan for internationalization kind of on a day one basis? Why does that make sense?
Yeah, certainly. And the world has changed a lot in the last 10 years, ever since we started doing, I mean, we had a lot of archaic tools and technology which didn't work earlier on. And probably a lot of the companies who develop software products and even websites, went into the language thing as an afterthought. They would just develop something in English or whatever their source language is. Let's say somebody is in Germany and their source will be a German language website. And later on, they would think about going into another language. But now there are enough tools and technologies to actually do plan in advance beforehand, and make all those adjustments and code related matters available from the very beginning, so that when you actually decide to spend on the language part of it, your code base is actually ready, and you don't need to rework or do anything like that. And here I would like to just quickly share a little bit on my slide here, if I can,
Yeah, please.
and that will make a point a little bit more clear about what this is. If you can see this, so what it says is that internationalization is really the process in which you actually create the source code for this language so that it can accommodate any operating system or browser which may be in a different language. And this is just a good to have. In our industry, we say internationalization as L18N, because there are 18 letters between L and N. And so the internationalization part is actually mainly these 10 things. We know that the US uses the date and time format very different from, let's say, the UK and some of the other places. The same is with number formats, currencies, even the separators in the currencies are in different places when we use a dollar and a euro and some of the other currencies. Mailing addresses could be in different formats, and there are all of these 10 stuff. And then add to the complexity of right to left languages where the screens are actually running in a different direction altogether. So if you haven't planned from the very beginning as to, I mean, just as an example, the next and back button in, let's say, Arabic is exactly in the opposite direction.
Okay.
Right. So if you've built a software which does not support later on, you will have to change the whole thing, including on your website. Right. So and these are the challenges which you have to be ready to even I mean, when you build the product, whether it's a website or an app or a software application, it has to have all of that accommodated from the very beginning, so that later on when you talk about the language, it's more about focusing on the language rather than reworking the whole stuff and doing a patchwork. So otherwise it will become like a band-aid on top of a band-aid, basically. So these are the things. And just as an example, let me just show you that here, look at the numbers here. In the US, this is how it's written. In Germany, France, all of them are different, right? And if you haven't built in the way to kind of accommodate these differences at a later stage, it's going to be all of the rework, and it's going to become a challenge. Same way here is, so I've just kind of shared a couple of examples for currency and numbers, which is the easiest to understand. So this is what I meant when you talk about the internationalization part. The code is made ready to accommodate all of this when you actually do the localization or the translation of that product or a service.
Right. Okay. And so it's clearly, obviously, it's really important to have this all kind of set before you're even well down the road. Like, I can understand that completely.
Right.
At the point where you are, like, say, scaling your business, like you planned ahead maybe, but like then when you are looking at scaling your business and you're going into different areas and industry, the concept of localizing the content, some people might look at it, go, oh, well, they'll kind of figure it out, I guess, you'd hope. Is there any reason, like, or can you help me understand why it might be useful to actually localize that content more so than just hoping that somebody will understand what you mean when it's in dollars if you're in, a euro-based country?
Yeah, certainly. And I think, the next graph actually will give you a little bit of an idea of why it's important. Now, I would like to just, I mean, the thing about localization is it is about content. Now, you could localize potentially videos, you could potentially localize your website, your products, your marketing literature, anything that contains a content, even audio files, even training content. But here I will like to just focus on just two examples. Let's say video these days is used a lot even in the digital social media platforms, and there is a huge impact when you use even for your promotion related purposes on video. And here is some fact. It has been observed, and this is like research data which shows that people actually are more likely to purchase, almost 2 times more likely to purchase, when they view the demo video of your product or service in their own language. And this is another research which says, when you have the video in your marketing collateral, people actually tend to build, or the companies rather tend to build so much more times revenue, almost 50% faster revenue generation from there on. And CSE is one of those industry experts in our localization industry. It's called Common Sense Advisory, and they have a very nice, a very detailed research called "Can't Read, Won't Buy." What it means is that it says 60% of non-English consumers will simply refuse to buy a product on an English-only website. 60%. So let's say if there are 100 visitors coming to your site, if 60 people don't talk English, they're simply not going to buy on your website. So the buying experience in their own language is extremely important. And that is what is justified by the next sentence, which says 55% of users will prefer to shop online in their native language by choice. And 53% people feel more comfortable if the website and the buying experience, till the shopping cart, the whole experience, it's a buying experience, is in their native language. And 74% will give you a repeat purchase. So here is enough evidence for you to say, if you don't talk language of your consumers, they're going to ditch you simply. And this is one of the stuff which actually validates the overall the language distribution over the internet. I mean, here we are talking about the digital economy today, as it's important to reach out to customers through that medium. So if you look at this, what this graph actually shows is, on the right hand side, the green graph actually shows the number of users currently on the browsing on the internet medium, right? And on the left hand side, if you see, it's the availability of content. Now look at Chinese. There are already, and this data is slightly old, okay, so today it may be slightly different. If you look at the number of users in millions, the Chinese is like 509, but look at the content available on the internet in Chinese. And that's the scope for the market, right? That means that a lot of people are not talking to Chinese people to sell the product in their language.
Right.
And that's true for the other.
And what just a quick like tag on to that, like what do you attribute that to? Is that just like, I mean, people have built things in English and it's kind of the biggest market to capture first, and then everything's an afterthought, and now it's evolving in that direction? Is stuff is moving that way? Is that what you've seen?
Yeah, there are two things in this. One is the legacy or the traditional idea, because US has been traditionally the biggest market, and the internet kind of spinned off from there. And and of course US is always the biggest market, right, for any product and service. And I have myself personally spoken to a lot of customers in the US, and for them the whole world is English. And these days it's becoming a little Spanish, because there are a lot of Spanish population in the India. So that's how this has started. If we cover English, we are only interested in Canada and the US and the UK to cover the population, not realizing, because it's a part of that education that we have to do as a language industry again and again and again. I don't think we are reaching out to the decision makers as an industry in a holistic fashion to be able to impress upon them how they could generate even more revenue. But the COVID has done this a little bit for us, in the sense that now when they find that it's more lucrative to kind of go online, because they can't meet people, they can't go to conferences and stuff like that, they suddenly get to a realization point that, okay, there's the whole world I can reach out to if I'm on the internet. And so it's beginning to change. I mean, this graph looked very different, of course, earlier on. It's improving, certainly. People are understanding, educating customers is becoming more easier than it was 5 years back. But there is still a very large section of the decision making business people who still don't know this graph, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, I can ask you, how aware were you of these dynamics?
Yeah, that's the thing. I had no idea it was this this steep. I would have assumed. I'd imagine interestingly, I'd imagine like the websites that would be created in other languages, it's natural, I guess, to translate it to English. But going the other way is less thought of. But obviously, the importance.
But
of
it works both ways. Works both ways, in the sense that, let's say it's a German company, and they build their website or everything for Germany. I can actually tell you, even their regular, even 4 or 5 years back, the train reservation system in Germany, db.com, was only in German. You couldn't book if you were an English guy on their website. It was extremely difficult, and I've faced that challenge. So it's
Right.
not just English into the other one; it's the other way as well. So there are German and French and other people who think for them their country is most important to serve their product. So while there will be some products which are more local and physical products which may not actually go out of the country, and fine, but when it comes to things like travel, digital products, which does not have, it doesn't understand boundary, right? You can sell it anywhere, the digital
Mhm.
product specifically, and services. Why
Right.
would you restrict yourself to just that geographical area when you can simply reach out by spending a little bit more? You just spend this much and suddenly your market opens up by so many million people in that language.
Sounds like a cool opportunity. I'm curious about the actual process itself. So, right. So, I mean, I can think of translating something manually. I can do personally a bit from English to Spanish, but
Okay, good.
translating into all of these various languages, I'd imagine is there's a process there. What does that sort of process look like in a sense of like translating an entire web page or at scale?
The answer is actually very long, and it at actually answering it in a few minutes is going to be difficult. But I'll try and do my best. And it depends on the nature of content, right? So the process of translating a website would be very different from translating a software product and a mobile application. But having said that, as per the specific ISO standards that we follow, there are some blocks which are very common amongst all the things that you translate. And one of the things that is very important to do understand is first, who is actually your target audience, what kind of people they are for whom you want to translate, right? For example, if you are translating learning content for kids, it can't be translated the same way as you may be translating for adults, for example, right? And there are other processes like being focused on the domain. So for example, if you have to translate for legal content versus a medical content, you can't be using a medical translator to translate legal content, for example, right? So there is a specific process of translation itself, which we call as the TEP process: translation, editing, proofreading. So usually there are two people, at least two people involved in the linguistic side of things. Then there are people who do the quality control and stuff like that. And even before that, like we just spoke about planning for internationalization, so there are experts who actually prepare the files for them to be localized properly. In many cases, there are excellent tools available which you use to actually prepare files. You don't have to do a lot of the manual stuff these days. There are excellent tools in our industry these days which help you automate a lot of the stuff in preparing files, preparing the content ready for translation, and ultimately, the tools and technology help in creating consistent repository of the translation assets which you can reuse at a later point of time. So there is a science and process behind all of this stuff happens. But essentially, the process to translate a website or even the tool and technology will be slightly different, for example, when you would do something else. But essentially the process is very straightforward, in terms of the block diagram, as I might say.
I understand. Okay. So it's, yeah, there is this kind of step-by-step process to that. I'd imagine, like, I mean, I know myself, if I'm founding a startup, it could be a bit overwhelming to try and take it from like, okay,
Yeah.
I know English and I can write and design a website in English, but then trying to take that step-by-step process can be challenging. The other question I'd have, and it's kind of, I think this is like probably one of the last questions I have for you, just like if I am at that point of I'm trying to decide, okay, what language do I translate to first? I think, well, based on that graph, I should probably go
Yeah.
to Chinese or to Spanish Chinese. But is like, what is that the only decision-making metric, or
No,
how do
no,
you decide on like what
no.
to translate to first if you have to prioritize?
Yeah, that's a very good question, actually. And, I didn't know you would come across that. I just had that slide ready, guessing maybe you would come to that point. But no, actually, it's not that straightforward. So, for example, let's say if you're looking at localizing video games, for example, right? The company might decide, it is a decision making process after all, right? You don't go about just seeing who are the highest number of people. So for example, if you don't have sales and marketing or the support system in for example for Chinese language, because selling a product also comes with providing support, right? And if you don't have people speaking Chinese or providing support to that language, then there's no point localizing that product. It's a complete package, right? So it's the first is a business decision as to who's the target audience, like I mentioned. Who do you want to reach out to? And where is it that you are willing to invest in selling that product? If it's let's say, just taking the example of video games, we know for sure that the biggest markets of selling video games is the US, Japan, South Korea, China. These are the like the big ones, right? So depending on what you want to invest and where you want to invest, you could decide to say explore the first two countries or three countries, and depending on what budgets it really allows. And that is just one complexity in the whole chain, and it could depend on what is your product, where is your actually target audience, and it requires sometimes to do even market surveys, because you may not get a ready or direct answer from your sales guys. And we've had customers who actually employ specific localization consulting companies locally, because let's say, let me give a more complex example. Today, if somebody asks me, what are the languages I want to localize, let's say for India, India has officially 23 languages, right? And each
Right.
of these states can be considered as a separate country, actually, in that sense. So,
Okay.
so it really depends on where you are. So China is a different country, India is a different country, and if you talk about Middle East, there are like I think 7 or 8 different languages or more languages in the Middle East, right? So you can't take Middle East as just one chunk. There is Dari, there is Pashto, there is Arabic, there is Lebanese, and so many of them are there, right? So, and even within Arabic, Arabic has like 12 or 15 dialects, right? So Egypt is different from Lebanon, is different from Iraq, is different from Saudi Arabia. So there are a lot of complexities involved in making that decision. And my only advice to people who would want to get into this field is do enough due diligence in selecting somebody who can advise them very well. As to, you need help. I mean, business makers will need help from companies like ourselves. There are enough consulting companies to advise. Not everything can be done by localization companies like ourselves. Sometimes we have partners who be involved in getting information regarding that. And then there are consulting companies like Common Sense Advisory, NIMSI, who actually undertake these projects to do it. But if you have a local office, if a company has a local office in that particular country they want to enter to, that's the best thing, because they can use the local understanding as to where their market is, and then make those decisions as well. So it has a lot of factors built into the whole thing.
Absolutely. It's interesting. Like I can picture how at scale large companies have a huge they might have a big sales team that is selling into all of these different industries, but you still have to do the kind of specific market research for translation. There was one thing you said about having support on your team for the language you're going to translate into. This is something we talk to our startups about. They're always they're relatively early stage, but we're always talking to them about having a diverse team, and that's diverse in skills, but also I can see in the idea of internationalizing your business, having diversity of language is important to have on your early team, because it's going to enable you to think longer term in this way.
See, actually, the interesting thing, this is a very interesting point which you mentioned. And what I find is most of the European companies are fairly aware of it. It's much better in the European area than, maybe in the US or Canada, because I think the general upbringing of people in Europe is they're already surrounded with all these small countries with different languages, right? So I think that awareness in this area is much better as compared to some of the areas. So I think they already understand that complexity. And I think one of the things that I want to focus here is that from whatever we are talking about, small or startup companies should not get scared by hearing such complex issues. um, Starting very small in localization actually helps from day one. So you don't have to go for 40 languages or 50 languages. You can just focus on 1 or 2 languages as an experiment, whichever ones you understand very well and you have a good market. So you have to just plan very small, test the market out. And the point is that if a language works for you and the revenue gets up by 30-40% from the new language, that just gives you much more breathing space and revenues to go out into other languages. So it's not required to think very big and multiple number of languages from day one. Start small.
Start small and scale. It's a great message, and it's something that helps in every area of startups. But I've run out of questions on this. I don't have more. But is there anything else we should know about this industry that, like, is up and coming or is changing, or from your expertise, how is this industry changing? What's coming next? Like anything else to
Yeah.
share?
Yeah, plenty of things are coming up. So I would advise anybody who's interested in learning more. So we are part of an industry association called GALA, Globalization and Localization Association. They have excellent content online to learn about what is happening, what's going to happen. They have virtual events coming up every 3 months time. One is coming up, I think, in March or April. So anybody who's interested in getting into this field, I would invite them. And I can just put on my slide where actually I will just put on my email address as well. And people can contact us, or they can write to us and stuff like that. We'll be happy to help with advice and anything. But Gala is a great website for general learning and understanding, and there is a depth of content there. There are a lot of technology changes happening even in our industry, right? So everything to connect different tools and technologies, and what we call these days as connected translation. So a lot of the content engines that are out there, whether it is in WordPress, whether it is in Magento, all the stuff that developers use on a day-to-day basis. There are a lot of these APIs, plugins, and softwares being developed to seamlessly work with these software, which wasn't the case a few years back. So it's making the process much more easier and faster than it used to be. So for startups, there is really a lot of good news that there are plenty of choices when it comes to technology decisions if they want to jump into this area.
Amazing. Well, look, all of the things that you mentioned, I'll get the links to. And when we upload this to the YouTube channel, many people are probably watching it right now on YouTube. So if you're watching it, the links to what Biraj had mentioned, I'll have down in the description as well. Biraj, as you said, if you guys want to reach out, he'll help you out with your internationalization skills and needs. But for today, Biraj, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your knowledge with our community.
Absolutely, it's been a pleasure, Joseph, and any other time I'll be happy to come again. Thank you so much.
Amazing. All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye, take care.